And what if what paralyzes you today is not an explicit trauma, a visible tragedy, or a mistake from the past, but rather the echo of something that never happened? Absence has a strange weight. It doesn't scream, but it whispers. It doesn't appear in photos, but it lingers in every silence. Growing up without a father's presence is like trying to put together a puzzle with a missing central piece. You might fill it with creativity, strength, talent, but deep down, you know something is out of place. And what's most curious is that this absence is not always total. Sometimes the father was physically there, but emotionally absent. Other times, he left even before you were born. But the effect almost always is the same. A kind of shame that's hard to name, as if the fault for the absence is yours. This is where Brené Brown's concept of shame comes in, and the devastating impact it has on our ability to connect. Because shame doesn't say, "What happened is bad." It says, "You are bad." When this narrative settles in childhood, it becomes fertile ground for all kinds of emotional blocks. You start to feel like you need to prove yourself all the time, that you can't make mistakes, that you don't deserve affection without effort. And when someone gets too close, you pull away or attack. It's as if affection is a dangerous place because the absence of those who should have loved you first taught you that you can't trust. This script is an invitation to look at this with courage, not to blame, nor to sink into old wounds, but to open a space for inner listening, and perhaps, for the first time, put words where there was once only thick silence. Let's walk side by side with the teachings of Brené Brown, with her studies on shame, vulnerability, and belonging. And more than understanding what holds us back, the proposal here is to feel, to truly feel, because shame hides in the unspoken. But when we allow ourselves to look, speak, feel, something begins to unlock. It may seem like an exaggeration to say that paternal absence shapes the way we love, work, trust, or emotionally react. But the truth is that the first figures of care and validation deeply affect our sense of self-worth. When this bond is broken, or never even formed, the child doesn't understand the context. They just feel, if my father didn't stay, maybe I'm not worthy. And this maybe turns into a silent belief that follows adulthood like background noise. It's there in unfruitful relationships, in the fear of being seen, in emotional rigidity, in suffocating perfectionism. Shame, in this context, acts as an invisible glue that keeps these beliefs stuck to ourself. And unlike guilt, which can be redemptive and even educational, shame paralyzes. It isolates, pushes inward, suffocates. We start to create masks, the mask of the successful, the strong, the insensitive, the funny, anything that hides the fear of being perceived as needy, fragile, or undesirable. But behind these masks, often, there's an ancient emptiness, and that's where the importance of talking about this lies. Not as a complaint, but as an act of courage, because naming what hurt is the first step for the pain to stop dominating us. This journey we propose here is both philosophical and emotional. We will search through untold stories, unshed tears, inherited silences. And who knows, along the way, we might rediscover parts of ourselves that were left behind in the attempt to seem strong. Because paternal absence doesn't have to be a sentence. It can be a portal, a call to rewrite our own story, with more truth, more compassion, and above all, more presence. Brené Brown often says that shame only survives in silence. And this is especially true when we talk about wounds we've carried since childhood, but that never had a space for expression. Paternal absence is one of those invisible pains. It doesn't come with a manual for grieving, nor with rituals of farewell. It simply happens, and the child we were needs to make sense of it. Often, the meaning is cruel. He left because I wasn't enough. And this thought, even though irrational, digs roots into the unconscious, influencing everything: our choices, our affections, our blocks. This script won't give you ready-made formulas, but it will accompany you like a sensitive mirror through the cracks of what was lived and what couldn't be. Together, we will dismantle the armor we created to survive, but that today only prevents us from living truthfully. We will explore the defense mechanisms we use to avoid feeling, and understand how they also prevent us from loving. And above all, we will try to rescue a more compassionate view of ourselves. Because behind shame, there is a child who only wanted to be seen, heard, embraced. If you've come this far, maybe you're already ready to look at this hole with a little more kindness. Maybe it's time to stop running from the pain and start listening to what it has to say. Because it is through listening that we heal, and it is by allowing ourselves to feel that we unblock. So, take a deep breath and come with me. There is a type of grief that no one teaches us to live: the grief for what never happened. When we talk about paternal absence, we are not just mentioning the lack of a name on the birth certificate or someone missing from the seat next to us during a school presentation. We are talking about something much deeper. An absence that seeps into the corners of the mind and heart, shaping the way we see ourselves and the world. It's a silent pain, but persistent, like background music that never stops playing, even when you pretend you're not listening. What makes this grief so difficult is that it has no form. No farewell, no funeral, no "my condolences." It only has emptiness. A hole where, theoretically, there should have been care, affection, protection, guidance. And no matter how much the rational mind understands that it wasn't your fault, the emotional body registers it differently. There was a lack of love, so I must be the problem. This conclusion, even if unconscious, is devastating. And the cruelest part? It's not usually questioned. We go on living with this premise stuck to our skin, like an emotional tattoo that no one can see. Often, the dominant feeling is neither anger nor longing. It's shame. Shame for not having had it. Shame for not knowing what it's like to be embraced by a father figure. Shame for not being able to talk about it without seeming fragile. And this shame manifests in small gestures, in the difficulty of accepting compliments, in the fear of trusting too much, in the certainty that abandonment is inevitable. Because if even the father didn't stay, who else would? In this case, the absence becomes a lens through which everything is seen, including oneself. This type of experience often forms the core of a distorted self-image. The child who grows up with this absence tends to take responsibility for the lack, not out of malice, but because that's how the child's brain tries to make sense of the world. And this sense of childish guilt is what later turns into the toxic shame that Brené Brown often warns about. A shame that doesn't say, "This was bad," but rather, "You are bad, defective, unworthy." It is at this point that the absence stops being a fact from the past and becomes a psychic presence in the present. This explains why so many people who have moved on from paternal absence still feel a tightness in their chest during key moments in life: relationships, parenthood, losses, achievements. It's as if, even after moving forward, an inner part is still stuck in that moment of abandonment. Unresolved pain doesn't disappear, it camouflages itself. And when it doesn't find a voice, it transforms into emotional sabotage, into rigidity, into fear of love, into difficulty trusting. And this is when shame becomes a prison, a cell without bars, but with many internal voices telling you that you'll never be enough. But is that really true? Does this story need to keep defining you? Or is it possible, even with wounds, to start writing a new chapter, where the absence of the other no longer determines your presence in yourself? These are difficult questions, but absolutely necessary. And that's what we'll talk about in the next section. What happens when this unresolved pain stops being a wound and transforms into identity? When pain doesn't find space to be felt, it hides. And the place where it hides is often behind masks. Masks that seem to protect, but deep down only reinforce isolation. Shame from paternal absence rarely expresses itself directly. It doesn't say, "I'm hurt because my father didn't stay." It says, "I need to prove all the time that I'm good enough." Or, "I can't depend on anyone." Or worse, "If I show who I really am, they'll abandon me too." And so, the person creates emotional armor that, over time, becomes part of the character they play in the world. These masks come in many forms. Some are made of superiority. The person who needs to seem better than everyone else, who competes even in casual conversation, who humiliates to avoid being humiliated. Others are made of self-sufficiency. People who've learned not to ask for help, not to show weakness, not to allow themselves to need. There are also masks of constant humor, emotional coldness, chronic perfectionism. They all have one clear function: to prevent anyone from seeing the shame behind them. Because this shame, born back then, has turned into a secret conviction that being truly seen is dangerous. And it's not by chance. Because if the first great emotional bond, the one with the father, was broken or never existed, it leaves a mark on the soul. The belief that bonds are not trustworthy. The child learns, even without understanding, that love is unstable, that presence is temporary, that trust is something to be avoided. And this later turns into emotional blockage. The person may want to connect, but can't. When the other gets too close, they retreat, or attack, or sabotage, because the fear of future rejection is greater than the pleasure of present connection. Brené Brown speaks about this clearly. The armor we build to protect ourselves from pain also prevents us from living fully. Shame convinces us that it's safer to live by pretending, even if that costs our authenticity. And this is where the danger lies. We start living not as we are, but as we think others want us to be. And this performance, no matter how brilliant it seems, comes at a very high price. The soul gets lost amid roles, defenses, and distance, until one day, we no longer know who we truly are. The paradox is this: the masks we put on to protect ourselves from shame end up preventing us from healing it. Because shame dissolves in empathy, belonging, and shared vulnerability. And all of this only happens when we allow ourselves to be seen, not seen as an image, but as truth. But to get there, it takes courage. Courage to recognize that the pain is there, that it shaped a lot of things, but that it no longer needs to control life, because it is possible to take off the mask, little by little, respecting your own pace, and rediscover your own face. And the first step to this is deconstructing the internal narrative. That story shame wrote back then, telling you that you are unworthy, weak, or disposable. In the next section, we will talk exactly about this: how to rewrite the origin. Because inherited shame doesn't have to be identity. The biggest trap of shame is when it disguises itself as identity. When the pain of absence, instead of being recognized as a painful but external experience, becomes a truth about who we are. I am the child who didn't deserve love. I am the problem. I am hard to love. This is the deepest point of the wound, because when we believe the lack is in us, and not in what was denied to us, we start to live according to this belief. It begins to shape our choices, relationships, the way we treat ourselves, and allow ourselves to be treated. But there's something essential to understand here. Every story can be retold. And retelling is not lying, nor pretending it didn't hurt. It's giving new meaning to what happened. It's looking at the past with the eyes of maturity and realizing that the abandonment we suffered said more about who left than about who stayed. The inherited shame is not yours. It was planted there by circumstances you didn't choose. But now, with awareness, you can choose what to do with it. And this choice begins with a simple yet profound gesture, naming the pain. Brené Brown talks a lot about this. When we put into words what we feel, we take out of the dark what shame wants to keep hidden. Naming the pain is the first act of power over it. Saying, I was neglected. I felt worthless. I was afraid of not being loved. It's painful, of course, but it's liberating. Because only what is recognized can be transformed. What is denied continues to act in the shadows, and shame loves the shadows. It grows in silence, in solitude, in secrecy. Exposing the wound, even if it's just to yourself, already starts to break this cycle. Another crucial point is to recognize the beliefs that were internalized. Many of us go through life as if we're trying to compensate for something, prove our worth, be perfect, avoid any mistakes. And all of this because, deep down, we believe we are defective. But this belief is not true. It is a reflection of the pain, a distorted lens. And when we begin to question this lens, with love and firmness, we regain the freedom to be who we are, without the need to fit into molds, without needing to hide vulnerability. Empathy, here, becomes an antidote. When someone listens to our story with presence, without judgment, something inside us begins to reorganize. Because what heals shame the most is feeling that we are not alone, that others also carry wounds, that being human is this, dealing with lacks, losses, misalignments, and still continuing to search for meaning and connection. Shame loses its power when it is embraced with compassion, and more than that, it can be transmuted. It can turn into strength, wisdom, purpose. But for that, we must stop living according to the story the pain wrote, and begin to write our own. And this rewriting doesn't happen just with words. It happens with emotional presence, with the courage to feel, with the willingness to peel back layers of protection and touch what's been frozen inside. In the next section, we will open this space, unlocking emotions, to unlock life. You know that feeling of always having the handbrake pulled? That even though life is moving forward, something inside seems to be stuck? Often, this has nothing to do with a lack of strength or ability, but with repressed emotions, feelings that were swallowed down long ago, fear, sadness, need, anger, and that were left stored in a corner of the soul like forgotten boxes in an attic. And the cruelest part is that we learned far too early that feeling hurts, that it's better not to stir things up, better to be rational, focused, strong. But this strong often means disconnected. Paternal absence teaches us this without words. When the figure who should provide comfort fails or disappears, the child's emotional world collapses. They feel everything intensely, but without anyone to share it with. So, little by little, they begin to numb. They learn not to cry, not to show, not to trust. And this, which starts as a survival mechanism, turns into an emotional block. The person grows but continues protecting what was once hurt. And this prevents them from living fully, because living, truly, requires feeling. Brené Brown says that we can't numb only the pain. When we try to numb sadness, fear, shame, we also numb joy, love, empathy. Life becomes lukewarm, functional, but without sparkle. And in a world that values productivity, it's easy to hide in this. work a lot, distract yourself a lot, rationalize everything. But the body doesn't lie. Eventually, it demands payment. Anxiety, crises, a sense of emptiness, difficulties in relationships. They are the cries of a soul that wants to feel again, that wants to be whole once more. Unlocking emotions is not a linear or easy process. It requires courage. The courage to look inward and let whatever needs to come, come. Sometimes it's a tear you've held back for years. Sometimes it's anger that was never allowed to be expressed. Sometimes it's just silence. That thick silence of someone who missed something essential and never knew how to ask for it. Allowing yourself to feel is a revolutionary act, because contrary to what many believe, feeling doesn't weaken you. Feeling frees you. Feeling heals you. Feeling restores our wholeness. And for that, it's necessary to practice emotional presence, being with yourself without judgment, noticing the triggers, the automatic reactions, and choosing little by little to respond differently. Breathing, writing, therapy, meditation, real conversations. All of these are paths of reconnection, but the most important thing is the willingness to stop running from yourself, to stop avoiding the pain and start listening to it. Because many times, all it wants is to be recognized. And when we begin to allow ourselves to feel, something beautiful happens. We realize that we can embrace ourselves, that we no longer depend on the presence that was missing, because now we are here for ourselves. And this leads us to the next point on this journey, the art of becoming the father to yourself. There comes a moment in life when the realization hits. The father we expected may never come. He may never say what we needed to hear. He may never apologize. He may never embrace us as we deserved. And this realization, no matter how painful, can be a turning point. Because from there, we have a choice. Continue waiting for someone who will never come, or start to occupy that space internally. Becoming the father to yourself is exactly that, reclaiming authority over your own life and offering yourself what was once sought outside: presence, structure, protection, and direction. This is where true healing begins. Because when the father is absent, whether through abandonment, death, coldness, or neglect, he leaves a symbolic void. And this void often manifests as confusion, insecurity, impulsiveness, fear of making mistakes, difficulty taking a stand. It's as if there's a missing internal voice that says, "You can do this. I'm here. It will be okay." But this voice can be cultivated, little by little, with awareness, and most importantly, with compassion. The goal is not to replace the biological father, nor to erase the pain. It's to fill the void with presence, your own. Building this internal father involves very simple but powerful practices. It can be writing a letter to yourself, committing to stand by your side. It can be imagining, in meditation, a figure that represents this fatherhood, strong, firm, loving. It can be establishing rituals of self-care where you take on the role of one who protects and nurtures your own path. Each gesture in this direction helps to solidify a new inner territory where you feel safer, more whole, more capable of leading your own story. And there's more. Becoming the father to yourself also means embracing the wounded child that still lives within you, the one who wanted to be seen, the one who thought they had to be perfect to deserve love, the one who felt lost when no one came to get them. This child doesn't need to be alone anymore. They can finally be embraced by a part of you that knows how to care, that understands, that accepts. And this internal reunion is transformative because it changes your relationship with the past, the present, and the future. It changes the way you treat yourself, and how you allow others to treat you. It's not a quick process, nor an easy one. There will be setbacks, anger, doubts, but each step in this direction is a step toward liberation. You stop living as an eternal emotional orphan and begin to be the protagonist of your own affection. This doesn't mean the pain disappears, it just stops being in charge. What's in charge now is a new pact, a commitment to your wholeness, your truth, your courage to live without pretense. And when this internal father begins to grow stronger, something incredible happens. Shame gives way to dignity. Fear gives way to trust. Need gives way to presence. And it's then that you truly begin to open yourself to real relationships, without defenses, without games, without blocks. In the next section, we will explore this point. When shame transforms and vulnerability becomes a bridge to love. There comes a point in this journey when we look back and realize the pain that seemed like only destruction was also a portal. The shame that paralyzed us was actually a cry for care, a chance to return to our inner home. And it's at this point that vulnerability, once feared, avoided, rejected, begins to be seen as strength. As Brené Brown shows us, vulnerability is not weakness, it is pure courage. It's the willingness to show up even with fear. It's saying, I feel that too. And in doing so, making space for others to recognize themselves in us. When we begin to speak about what hurt, without hiding, something shifts in the space around us. People stop feeling so alone. They start lowering their own defenses. It's as if, by disarming the armor of shame, we allow true connection to happen. And then, a new way of living emerges, more honest, more whole, more free. Because there's no longer a need to pretend to be invulnerable, no longer a need to prove ourselves all the time. Value doesn't come from performance, it comes from presence. This transformation of shame is, above all, a process of choice. Choosing to open up, choosing to tell the story with truth, choosing to be seen, even with the scars. Is it a risk? Of course. But it is also the only way to truly belong, because real belonging is not earned by trying to please, but by being who you are. And when this courage settles in, relationships change. The way we love changes. The way we work, position ourselves, live. Everything begins to align with something more authentic. Paternal absence, in this new light, stops being a prison of the past. It becomes fertile ground for self-awareness, compassion, and presence. It stops being a story of loss and becomes a journey of encounter. And this encounter, paradoxically, is born from pain. Because pain exposes what is essential. It strips away the superficial. It forces us to look inward. And if we have the courage to remain in this gaze, it also reveals a path, the path of reconnection. Yes, it takes time and care to get here. But once you realize that you can transform shame into belonging, everything changes. You stop seeing yourself as someone broken and start seeing yourself as someone who survived, someone who, even without the right maps, found their own north. And that's extraordinary, because it stops being about who was missing and becomes about who you choose to be. And then comes the final question, perhaps the most important of all. What if your father's absence isn't the end of your story, but the beginning of your truest presence? What if, by looking at this pain with courage, you could make space to live with more wholeness than you ever imagined? You've made it this far, maybe with a tight heart, maybe with memories that had long been dormant, maybe with a twinge of anger or a lump in your throat that you don't quite know where it came from. All of this is part of it. Feeling at this level is already a revolutionary act, because for so long, maybe for an entire life, You were taught to ignore this pain, to hide it, to rationalize it, to keep moving forward as if nothing had been missing. But the truth is, something was missing. And acknowledging this doesn't weaken you, it frees you. Paternal absence has left marks, yes, but it doesn't have to be your sentence. It can be the raw material for awareness, presence, and transformation. And this begins when you stop running from shame and start listening to it. When you understand that the pain from childhood no longer needs to control your adult choices. When you commit, day by day, to be the father to yourself, even if it's clumsy, even if you stumble, and to care for the child who once waited, and who today, finally, is being seen. From here, the question changes. It's no longer, why didn't my father stay? But rather, who do I choose to be now, despite this? And more, what kind of presence do I want to offer the world, my relationships, myself? Because when you overflow the absence, when you choose to live with your heart open despite everything, you break a cycle, you write a new narrative, you prove, with your own story, that it is possible to transform pain into dignity, lack into potential, silence into voice. So, maybe today is the day to take a step. Not a grand step, it doesn't need to be. But an honest step. It might be talking about it with someone, writing a letter that was never sent, looking in the mirror with more kindness, asking for help, or simply taking a deep breath and saying to yourself, I am here, and I will take care of myself. Because in the end, what was missing back there can become the seed of what you choose to cultivate moving forward. And this, yes, is a rare kind of miracle. When where there was no ground, a new path is born.